please tell me I'm not the only one that whenever they're in deep thought and just out of the blue get some ideas, some kind of like direct downloads from the universe, and you go, hmm, actually, there was someone that I had on the podcast that said that. And you then reminisce about it and you go, oh, I need to talk about it. That's exactly what happened with this podcast episode. I was remembering something that my guest said, Denise Duffield-Thomas. She's a money mindset mentor all the way from Australia. She's built a multi-million dollar business about how to be a creator. And if you have ADHD or if you are a creator who has shiny object syndrome, how do you create a business that is void of guilt tripping and you build a business that actually you want? You give yourself permission to do that. As a content creator, as a podcaster, as a business owner, I find that I get into that the hamster wheel where you get into thinking like, oh, I have to create podcast episodes, or like you're always thinking about content, whether that is because you're excited to do it or whether you're just thinking like, oh gosh, like I haven't published in a while. That always shows up. And so I know I'm not the only one, right? Like you also think about it like that, right? So I decided that this podcast episode was going to be a little bit of an implementation about something that I mentioned on the previous episode, but also something that gets your wheels turning and thinking about the journey that you've been as a content creator. And this quote that I absolutely detest, that is the fake it until you make it. If we have not met, hi, I'm an Xavier. I'm the founder of The Podcast Space. I'm an award-winning podcast marketer, and I teach you to better leverage your podcast, create in a more sustainable way so that you become influential, that people remember you, and that you get excited about creating a podcast so that you stay in the game longer. All right, let's dive into this week's episode of The Podcast Space. So this podcast is kind of an amalgamation of two previous podcast episodes. So episode 114, season 4, which is the one with Denise, and an episode that I recorded back in season 2, episode 88. And it was all about how there's like something like once in a lifetime opportunities because your podcast will provide you more than that. However, as we look around, it has been really kind of tiring to create content since I would say like 2024 or maybe even 2023. The algorithms and all social media, podcasting, newsletters, like all of the things that use algorithms to better track your behavior and serve you content. It has just changed so much that you just have to follow a lot of different formulas in order to be seen. All to say that if you're a podcaster, you're in the hamster wheel of creation and you're not acknowledging the person that you're becoming throughout this process. You're not acknowledging how much more you're knowing and how much more you actually know than most people. The idea behind creating, you truly showcase how much you actually know about something when you're teaching it to other people. And when you're showing up on your podcast feed and explaining things, doing solo episodes or in conversations with other leaders, you're breaking down concepts. That is a way to showcase your expertise. And I've found that people go into the high effort very quickly. So people think about complicated concepts, things that need to be incredibly, I would say, like advanced in order to grab the listener's attention, the audience attention, to then go, oh, wow, like, yes, that person, she is super knowledgeable or they are super knowledgeable. I want to hire them, or like they're the person I want to continue listening to the podcast. And, this conversation with Denise Duffield-Thomas really got me thinking about the process of just the learning as a business owner, you just compound on your knowledge, but also how some projects that you have created at some point in your life need to live as they were, even though your level of expertise has completely changed and you know more, or maybe the industry itself has changed. And she said something that during the interview, I was like, I know I know for a fact that I want to clip this into a section and kind of have it as a standalone feature. And that is actually what I talked about in the last episode. I talked about like different formats that you can use for your podcast. And, or was it episode? Now I'm confused. I think it may be episode 117. Either way, I'll link the right episode below. But sometimes the moments from conversations with your guests will really help you reframe what you think your content strategy needs to be. And this conversation with Denise was just so helpful. So I'm going to play a short clip about that, and then we're going to come back to the episode.
You're never going to feel ready. And I think if you're honest, you said transparency. I think that's a key word. I think that's always helped me to say, I don't know all the things. And I think sometimes we feel like we have to be very broad and we go, I need to know the whole life cycle of what's going to happen for my client, instead of just going, you know what, I'm just going to focus on this little bit. And if you are a beginner, you don't have to pretend that you know the whole journey, because there are always people who need to hear a beginner's mindset. And I look at this when I first self-published my book, Lucky Bitch, in 2011. And it's gone through a couple of versions. And recently I thought, oh God, there's things in there that make me cringe so hard. I want to go and rewrite the whole book. But I know I shouldn't, because it captured a time in my life where I was maybe a little bit naive and delusional, and that was the energy I needed at that time in my life. And there'll be people who will need to hear that version of me, not the version now who maybe is a little bit more experienced and
seasoned,
skeptical or seasoned, because I will go back and I will soften it. I will ruin that book, really, if I try and do it now. And so when you think of like that, you go, I can't write the books that I'll write in 3 decades from now. And that version of me can't write the books that I can write now. And insert book to podcast episode, content, whatever, right? And that's the beauty of it, is like you're only capturing a time in your life, and you can only know what you know now, right? So be transparent about it. Sometimes we have to be very mindful as content creators as well. What's our scope? What's our area of expertise? Where are we veering into places where maybe we shouldn't? And I think that's hard when you, especially if you have a busy brain, like we go, oh, I can talk about that. Oh, let me figure that out. Instead of going, this is going to be my wheelhouse, and I'm going to just be honest about what that is. This is why I call myself a money mindset mentor, by the way. It's a very deliberate thing for me, because people would say, oh, you're an expert in this. And I go, look, I'm a student in this too. So I mentor people through it, but I'm not an expert, right? And it was a very helpful distinction for me to make, to say, like, I'm not even coaching people necessarily on this, because it's not a one-to-one relationship. I think those things can really help you to go, of course I don't know everything. I don't. And that's okay. And this is what I do know. And like, let's figure this other stuff out together. So that's been really helpful. What was the other question? Because I rewound a little bit, and now I'm like,
oh, I think I was talking about being a contributor, not a guru, and knowing everything. I think we got around to it. One thing that you did mention that I thought it was really interesting at some point was, when people show up, they come also from the standpoint of I personally hate the fake it until you make it. And what you were talking about, how when you look back and you're like, actually, I'm not going to touch that, because I find that when you talk about the fake it until you make it, like in that perspective of you always have to keep fixing your work to match the expectations of what you've done today. I find that negates the power of the actual journey and where you are, and the power that it is just going through the process. And so the fake it until you make it, I'd rather go make it until do it until you make it. There you go. I think that is really important, that people really think about, like, you may not hit your money goal right now, but you're learning valuable lessons through your content, and that's going to make that connection with your audience, and weaving into the trust recession with our audience, and how important it is that we keep showing up. There you go. All right. What did you think about that? I thought that it was one of those moments that when she was talking about the book and writing the book, she would have ruined the book if she had rewritten it later in life. And that's why sometimes unless the information that you have on that book or in that podcast episode is incorrect, let it be as a kind of a moment in time that you knew that. And there will always be people that know that much, and then they can join you on the journey of learning from there and on. And this can be seen in your podcast catalog. People will start listening to you. And some people, I mentioned this before, so there's two types of people when they're going into your podcast feed. Either they start from episode number 1 and they work all the way up, or then they pick episodes based on interest. And so, there may be some content pillars that they prefer than others, or maybe they select the solo episodes because it matches their schedule a bit more. So there's these two different types of processes to consume content. And so when you're thinking about knowledge, just because I don't want you to cringe looking back, because the person that you were back then, you needed that person, you needed to cringe, you needed to go through the fake it until you make it. And to me, what I said, it was the do it until you make it. That will help you get to where you are right now, right? And there will be lessons in every single step of the way. And saying the fake it until you make it, it really removes power from you learning from that stage in your business, in your knowledge. And I want to invite you to not think from a standpoint of scarcity. So you go, I don't know enough, I can't possibly publish this episode because I don't have all the information I need at hand. And so when you're thinking about what is value, I really want you to go back to this kind of, to me, is like my North Star, which is, what is the value here? Why do I want people to listen to this podcast episode? And so, for instance, this episode is going to be shorter, under the 20-minute mark. It's going to be one that you will likely retain more knowledge on this episode than if the episode was 1 hour, because it's just our brain does not have the capacity to retain all of that information. And so sometimes it's really good to listen to an episode that was shorter. It was more curated. And to me, I am very ruthless with my own content. And so I go, okay, is this relevant for the listener? Did I yap? Is that yap needed? Because it kind of sets the tone a little bit to what's coming next, so that they have time to retain what I just said or what the guest just said, and then move into the next one. If it's like yapping for the sake of yapping, no. And Roman Mars, the host of 99% Invisible, at the podcast show, he did share this. He said, if we can shave 1 minute of that was unnecessary from the script, we will do it, because it's 1 million minutes saved. And I thought that was really interesting. And he uses an acronym also that is the can we get there faster? So CGTF. I love that I did this in real time. But I think that is very important, that one, you acknowledge every step of the way, because there will be lessons. And we tend to think about, if we don't know everything about every single thing in that moment, then it's not worthwhile doing. And I've mentioned in previous episodes how sometimes I go, I want to create kind of like a short and punchy podcast episode about this topic, and then I'll eventually talk about let's say either with an expert or dive deeper later on when I have the capacity, going back into the high effort and the low effort. And so sometimes some episodes are great to just say, hey, just want to drop these kind of pieces of information, boom, 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 done, and that's it, right? So if you are in a season in life that you're feeling really overwhelmed, you're looking around and you're saying, oh my gosh, there's so much to keep up, I want you to ask yourself, why would I publish this? And if you do have, because if you don't put out a podcast episode, when you're thinking about, the knowledge you have today is enough. You don't need to go out and research tons of things. If you want to go out and say, oh, there was just an article that came out that is related to my industry, which is strategy to create podcast episodes that are different that most people don't think about. Like that's a great strategy. If something just came out, and this is a strategy that I use a lot with my clients who are business owners and who are trying to position themselves as experts to get hired by, the audience. I will always say this, like, if anyone was to stop you right now and ask you about something, you would have an answer for that question, right? Like if anyone was to ask you about something that it was like, oh, I just saw that, let's say podcasting is into Netflix. Like, what do you think about that? You would have an answer, or I would have an answer, right? Same for your industry. I would have an answer that would be maybe like 5 to 10 minutes long. And that is enough, because if someone has that question, someone will be Googling that question. And so you want to be the search result that comes up. So that's something that I wanted for you to keep in mind. That segment from the conversation with Denise really stuck with me about what you know right now is enough. Don't go and ruin every single work that you've done before just because is, not to the extent of all the knowledge you have. I mean, this is episode 119. I'm sure episode 10, if I was to look back, I was like, oh my gosh, like the light isn't great, the whatever isn't great. And I'm just like, yep, it shows progress, and you want that. You want to be able to see progress, sometimes to a fault. Like I will create something on a Monday, publish it on Friday. I look at that, I'm like, oh gosh, I already learned pieces of information that it was like, oh yeah, like that's already not updated. But it's fine, it doesn't matter. It's just about being intentional about, if you have to show up on people's feeds, on their podcast feed, to have that content come out, what you're creating. I don't want you to overthink. I don't want you to record an episode 1,000 times because, you forgot something. What you have created is enough. There will always be someone that knows less than you. Now, the question here is that content, and this is where I'm like throwing a wrench in everything I've said on this episode, but it's important to remember, is that podcast episode, the level of expertise that you're talking about on the podcast episode, is that the right expertise for the audience that you want to either work with you, hire you, or buy your products and services, or connect to you as an expert? Because many times we create content from what comes out that is easy to do, and not necessarily what is strategic and what will drive the user behavior that we want our listeners to execute on, right? So I leave you with a big question. And as I continue, I'm recording this right before my meetup. I'm organizing a podcaster meetup for podcast experts, for women, non-binary folks, and trans podcast professionals, so that if you are in any of these categories and you want to join us, please do. We'll be in London. I'll leave the link in the show notes. But yeah, this is just one of the ways that I'm trying to create community as I am traveling in the UK. I've just came back from Bristol as well. I was with a former guest of the podcast, Amy Cox. And so it was just such a great opportunity to connect. So we ended up not creating a lot of content. This is kind of just a side note. We ended up not creating a podcast episode together. We're just like honestly enjoying our time. And this is where I would say this is a lesson within this topic that I'm like just introducing last minute. That is, the podcast should benefit your life. It should not take over your life. It should help enhance it. And so when I was with Amy, I was like, we're really having a good time. We're having conversations around business, about showing up, about what we want for our businesses and what we want for our careers. There's no point of me creating, like pulling out a tripod and recording a podcast episode here. Like, let me be in the moment. And so the podcast can do just that, right? Like when I was in Bristol, I had tons of downloads while I was just, enjoying life. And the podcast is there to do that for you. So it's there to connect you to the people that you appreciate, to help you have that bridge between what you want and where you want to be. And so the podcast should allow you to do that. It should not stop you from living your life. So that's kind of like the last note that I wanted to leave you here. But I invite you to connect with me on Instagram. I'm at thepodcastspace. There, drop me a DM if you resonated with anything in this podcast episode. You can also do that if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube. But yeah, I would love to work with you. If you want to learn more, reach out to me on Instagram, because we can talk a little bit about, I can send you a voice note about how we can help you get to your goals, how we can work through the obstacles that you're experiencing. I'm Van and Xavier, and I will love seeing you in the next podcast episode. All right, until then, just keep creating imperfect content that moves you forward. Bye.